Well, one step ahead of me would suggest that this passage in the Corinthian text is referring back to that passage in Exodus where Moses went up on the mountain and his face came out shining like the sun when he had that holy encounter with the living God. Now, if Exodus was one man's quest up to the top of the mountain, then think of this Corinthians text as one man's quest down to the foothills and back into the everyday working world in which we find ourselves. You know, the world with laundry and carpools. Welcome back. It waited for us. So from the mountaintop to the descent back into daily life, the Corinthian text takes us back into the foothills. If you've heard both of these stories correctly, and you've been over in that Exodus text, and you've heard what we read this morning, you know that this image of a veil appears. Shelley again has got the image of the veil, Christ on the mountain and the rocks beneath. So this veil appears. Well, it's in both stories, so we have to wonder, what's the significance of the veil? And is this image of the veil used the same way in each story, or is it used in a different way? And if so, why? What, if anything, then, does it have to do with us? And what's the big deal about coming down from the mountain anyway? I mean, hikers have been doing it for years. You go up the mountain, you come down the mountain. It's that simple. That's the way it works. What's the big deal about coming back down off the mountain? Well, first, let's talk about the descent from the mountain. If you look at this as an allegory of sorts, when we crest the mountains of life, whatever those mountains may be for us, we do so not just as an exercise, but we climb that mountain for a very specific reason. We're usually after something, an answer, a direction, some sense of calm or repose. We're after something when we head up. And even more so when we come down, we're hoping that after whatever epiphany or theophany may have occurred for us, that we will be able to sustain that mountaintop feeling that we got when we were there. When we arrive at the top of the mountain, there's probably that Everest exhilaration. When we come down, we have only the memory of the holy ground that we experience to sustain us. Well, if we take the mountaintop as kind of taking on a life of its own, we understand that when we come back down off the mountain, after we've had that life-changing experience, that facing the world is not always going to be the easiest thing to do. In fact, many people that I have talked to throughout my ministry who've come to share with me at some point or another about a spiritual experience that they've had, a mountaintop experience, or an experience without the mountain, but significant. Many will tell me that after they came off of that, you think about that as resurrection, coming off of resurrection, or coming off of a mission trip, and then coming back into life as it always has been. It's hard because the world doesn't always want to know how things have been with you or what you've experienced. Think about a time that you've had one of those types of experiences like a resurrection or a mission trip. I went on a mission trip when I was in college to the mountains in France, the Vosges Mountains in France, with a mission team that was doing door-to-door evangelism in a largely populated part of France that did not or was not considered highly religious. I traveled across that countryside with 14 girls from all over Western Europe, lived in different French homes for 2 months of people who were attempting to do church in their town and suffering all kinds of ridicule as a result of it. I came back from, really it was 2.5 months of being there, to a lot of friends that didn't really want to hear about it, didn't understand it, thought I was crazy. Door-to-door evangelism and trying to do it in French. I won't tell you some of the things I said that I got all mixed up in, but God worked through it anyway. But that was a marvelous experience, and coming back, and it was just, it didn't have the effect that I hoped that it would with those around me. I think as I've been watching all of this footage of those first responders in Haiti, what it must be like for them when they come back to all of our niceties and our fineries, knowing what's being left behind. Just this morning, seeing all the permanent or the temporary tent dwellings that are becoming permanent. because there's nowhere else to send the wounded and those who are homeless. The real world, when you come back, doesn't always want to bother with what you've experienced. They just want you to shut up and go on with life, business as usual, because you see, that's what the real world can handle. They can handle something that's nice and neat and packaged. None of this spiritual experience stuff, we don't know what to do with that. Keep that to yourselves. And so what we find ourselves doing when we've had a spiritual experience or something where God has entirely moved us in a way that we want to share about it, we find ourselves often stuffing the genie back in the bottle because other people around us can't handle it. And what will they think? It's hard to share with someone that is indifferent to the message that you have. And then when that happens, when we fail to share it, another good spiritual encounter bites the dust and just lays untilled. What's up with the veil? What's up with the veil in Exodus and here in Corinthians? In life outside of the United States and all over the world, they are not strangers to the use of veils. Turn on your evening news tonight and you can see in the Arab world and in the Islamic way of life that a veil is a part of life. For a woman, it's a part of her normal attire. It's meant as a sign of her identity, her modesty, her privacy, spiritual faithfulness. It may mean other things. When we think about Moses' use of the veil over in the Exodus text that I refer to, and hopefully you've looked at, he uses the veil in an interesting way. He uses it as a way to be able to protect people from the awesome and marvelous and mighty power of God. He has to be able to speak to them, so he gets enough distance that he can speak to them on God's behalf, but then when he goes in with God again, he covers his face. The image remains, and it's so powerful, that visage. But when Paul uses the same image of the veil over in Corinthians, look at how he starts the text. He begins by denigrating, it would seem, Moses and his use of the veil. Listen to this verse, verses 12 and 13. Since then we have such a hope, we act with great boldness, not like Moses, suggesting that what Moses did was not bold at all, who put a veil over his face to do what? To keep people from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. Now, what does that mean? What Paul was trying to say to the church at Corinth is, old law, old covenant, old customs were becoming passé.